Hello, everyone. Hello and good afternoon. I am Frank Louie, and I will be the moderator for today's session. Welcome to this webinar sponsored by the City of Los Angeles Department of Cannabis Regulation, Business Licensing and Compliance Assistance Program, also known as BLC. The BLC programming is designed to assist social equity applicants in Los Angeles in obtaining a commercial cannabis license and operating a successful cannabis business. This installment of our 2025 webinar series focuses on a discussion around local consumption lounges. Now, before we get started, let's take a moment to review some housekeeping rules. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and can be viewed only on DCR's learning management system after the editing process. You will be muted with cameras off for the duration of the webinar. This means that your camera and audio functions will not be available to you during this session. However, you will be able to see and hear all the panelists. There's an open chat box where you can interact with one another for networking or comment on the information. Please use caution when sharing personal information in a public forum and keep your questions focused on today's topic. Please ask questions about today's subject matter in the Q&A box. We are gathering and responding to your questions throughout the presentation, and we'll have a Q&A session where you will also get responses in the last portion of today's event. You're encouraged to utilize the Q&A box at the bottom pane of your Zoom screen. If you use the Q&A box for questions, everyone will be able to see the questions when they are answered. Finally, please note that today's content was not created by the Department of Cannabis Regulation or the City of Los Angeles and is for informational purposes only. This information is subject to change and does not replace or supersede Los Angeles Municipal Code nor constitute legal advice. If you have any specific questions outside of today's topic, please call 213-978-0738 during business hours, Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. to speak to a DCR representative. And now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Courtney Lang. Courtney is a California-based consultant specializing in cannabis real estate, licensing, and business development. She partners with businesses and leadership to build the foundation of a successful company. In addition to her cannabis background, Courtney offers her clients over 10 years of experience working in the natural foods industry for several small to medium-sized companies. Now I'd like to ask Courtney to join me on screen. Welcome, Courtney, and feel free to start sharing your screen and your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. Appreciate being here today with everybody. I'm going to take a quick moment here to share my presentation. Okay, so I'm really hoping that after today's webinar, the attendees will have a good understanding of the state laws and licensing process for cannabis lounges. And we're going to take a look at the business models and revenue streams of a couple of cannabis lounges that are currently operating in the state of California. Before we dive into today's webinar, please remember that the City of Los Angeles does not currently have event or consumption lounge licenses. These activities may not be conducted locally at this time. The purpose of this webinar today is to solicit public input and discuss policy proposals that are not yet law. DCR cannot guarantee that any comments or suggestions you hear today will be included in the final form of these laws. So to do so, to get a good understanding of cannabis lounges, the state law and licensing overview will be the first item that we review. Second, we'll take a look at cannabis consumption lounge business models around California and a couple of quick tips from operators. And then we'll jump into Q&A, and we should have a robust amount of time for Q&A today, probably about 30 to 40 minutes. And we'll be joined by Jason Killeen from the Department of Cannabis Regulation for that portion of the webinar. So starting off with state laws, let's move on to that first agenda item. First off, I wanted to take a look at the history of cannabis lounges in California. They have been allowed in the state since the beginning of commercial licensing in 2016. So many of you may have been to lounges previously in cities like San Francisco, Oakland. We've also got them in West Hollywood. So they've been around. Currently, there's approximately 20 local jurisdictions with cannabis lounge ordinances, and many are crafting them as we speak. I believe my last count was that there's actually 30 operating lounges in California. And for those of you who want to do a bit more research after today's webinar, there's a great link on CalNormal's website that has all of the local jurisdictions and then all of the cannabis lounges in those local jurisdictions. So if you want to check them out, that's a great resource. So why today? Why are we talking about cannabis lounges? Well, there's two reasons. The city of Los Angeles is in the draft phase of getting an ordinance passed for cannabis lounges. And we've got the Olympics coming up in 2028. I know it's a big push for the city to have cannabis lounges
Excuse me,
so
Courtney.
that there's safe
Excuse me,
places.
Courtney. I'm sorry. Your slides aren't showing, at least on the screen. Can you just double check?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
There you go. Um,
Okay.
there you go.
All right. We all good?
I see him now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the interruption. All right. So again, we've got the 2028 Olympics coming up. So there's a big push in the city of Los Angeles to get cannabis lounges open before then. So there's safe places for consumers to consume. We also recently had Assembly Bill number 1775, which became effective January 1st, 2025, which allows for the preparation and sale of non-cannabis food and beverage. This is a big one. It was debatable, like how profitable a consumption lounge could be when all you could do is smoke, vape, or ingest cannabis. So now with the passage of bill number 1775, you can prepare and sell non-cannabis food and beverage. So it opens up another consumer segment for those of people who may not want to consume cannabis. They can come in and they can consume non-cannabis food and beverage. So it opens up another revenue stream that I think is going to be really advantageous to operators. So the definition of a cannabis lounge. A cannabis consumption lounge is a licensed establishment for the on-site retail sale and consumption of cannabis or cannabis products. A lounge shall have a licensed premise that is a physical location separate from other commercial cannabis activities. So many of the cannabis lounges at this point in time, they have a dispensary where you can walk in and purchase your products and leave, or they can purchase products and they can go to an adjacent location where you've got your consumption lounge. So a lot of, again, currently these lounges will have a dispensary and next to it will be the consumption lounge. And it's important that those two are separated, right? You can't have the dispensary and the lounge all be one premise. They have to be separated. So that's an important note. Also, access is restricted to persons 21 years of age or older.
Courtney, are the slides not showing again, at least on the, I just want to make sure that they're up.
Should be. Let me reshare.
The slides were showing.
There you go. There you go.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. So what license type are you required to get with the state is probably your next question. So the California Department of Cannabis Control requires cannabis lounges to operate under a retail state license or a microbusiness state license with a retail component. Of course, in order to get a state license, you also must obtain local authorizations. So what is allowed at a cannabis lounge? The state allows lounges to permit smoking, vaping, or ingesting of cannabis products on the licensed premise. Lounges may sell prepackaged, non-cannabis infused, non-alcoholic food and beverages if the local jurisdiction allows. And they also may prepare and sell non-cannabis infused, non-alcoholic food and beverages, again, if the local jurisdiction allows. What's not allowed on site is going to be co-mingling of products. So you need to make sure if you are preparing non-cannabis food and cannabis food at your lounge, that those products are stored and prepared separately. The other thing that's really big important here is that there is no alcohol, tobacco, or hemp sales or consumption allowed on the premise. And cannabis consumption cannot be visible to the public. So when designing your site, you need to make sure that you have a large entryway that blocks any of the consumption areas from public view. In terms of local control, what the city of Los Angeles really has control over is definitely forms of consumption. So the city of Los Angeles can decide between which forms of consumption that the state allows, and they can pass their local ordinance effectively. So it's possible that it could just be an ingestion of edibles that you can have on site, your consumption lounge, or they can allow that and smoking and vaping. So it's up to the city of LA to allow the forms of consumption. The other component, a big component, is ventilation and filtration requirements. So local jurisdictions decide, again, whether to allow smoking and vaping, and if so, what the ventilation and filtration requirements are. So that's going to be obviously fans and air filtration systems, but in some cities and jurisdictions, you'll see like a negative pressure requirement where when a door to the outside opens, make sure that none of the vaporizers or the smoke is coming out of the building and into the public. So things like that are going to be what the city of LA will figure out in their ventilation and filtration requirements. The other component with local control is non-cannabis and cannabis-infused food and beverage preparation. So again, City of LA will decide whether food and beverage can be prepared and sold on site. Currently around the state of California, most consumption lounges either have zero food and beverage on site, or some of them allow you to have food delivered on site, but there's really not many examples at the time that have food and beverage prepared on site. But the city of LA has jurisdiction over whether or not to allow cannabis food and beverage to be prepared on site. Okay, so let's take a look at the city of Los Angeles licensing process real quick. Again, we'll just start off by telling you what like the basic high level process is. We've got establish a business entity, obtain site control of a compliant facility, get all of your local approvals through the city of Los Angeles and Los Angeles County, and obtain a state license through the Department of Cannabis Control. So when I talk to clients and it's kind of our first meeting and we break down what the process is, this is the 4-step process that we start off with. Again, you want to establish a business entity, gain site control of a compliant facility, and then go through the local and state licensing process. Next is just a zoomed in look at what the licensing process is in the city of Los Angeles. So all of the items in blue are what you're going to work on with the city of Los Angeles. And then in green is your annual state license with the Department of Cannabis Control. The first step is getting your business entity established with the city of Los Angeles. So once you have your entity registered with the state, then you're going to register it with the city. And the process for getting registered with a city is a business tax registration certificate and creating a legal business entity record on Excella. The second step, once you've obtained your location, you will go through the pre-application process with the Department of Cannabis Regulation. And this really determines whether the proposed business premise location is compliant and eligible. The next step with the city of Los Angeles is the annual license. And notably, this is where you'll get your CEQA requirement fulfilled for your state license. So the annual license is step 3. Next, you've got your certificate of occupancy and building permit. Those are going to be with the building department. You've got your public health permit next. And last with the city of Los Angeles is an operating permit. Again, annual state license in green. That will be obtained through the state, and you can start this process when you're in your annual license process with the Department of Cannabis Regulation. So just a quick overview of the process. Wanted to make sure everybody has that. Okay, in the next section, we'll have a little bit of fun. Let's take a look at the business models of a few cannabis consumption lounges currently operating in the state of California. It's important to note that almost all lounges began before AB 1775 was passed. So food and beverage options are really limited right now. They're certainly coming on board with existing cannabis lounges as they're permitted, but yeah, hard to see some models like the restaurant model for your cannabis lounge right now when it was just brought on board. I believe there's maybe one in Coachella, a restaurant. Anyhow, so first up, I wanted to take a look at Mo Green's. This is a vintage smoking lounge in San Francisco. I'd say it takes on the true form of a smoking lounge or like a cigar bar. And so it's a retro-inspired smoking lounge. It's got the lounge, which is attached to the dispensary, and it features a couple of consumption areas. So you can see it's equipped with some plush seating and like vintage decor. It offers a comfortable environment for vaporizer uses. And this is a picture of the dab bar right here. It does focus definitely again on smoking. So in terms of the revenue streams in Mo Greens, you've got the fact that you have to purchase from the dispensary in order to consume on site. So you would actually purchase your products inside the dispensary and you bring the receipt, put it on your table at the lounge, and you have to have it on the lounge table at all times. So that's a revenue stream, obviously getting patrons into the dispensary. They also rent equipment. So all of the smoking equipment that you see on the bar here is available for rent. They also have these VIP booths that are for rent, and they've got a special room too. Another way that they pull in some revenue is they've got a makeshift stage that they have, and they allow for comedy night, music, bingo, all kinds of things. So those are just a couple examples of their revenue streams. They do not allow non-cannabis food and beverage per San Francisco's ordinance, which may be changing soon. But currently, it's really just cannabis products for smoking and vaping, and then you can consume edibles that are purchased from the dispensary next door. Our next dispensary or lounge that we're going to look at is the dispensary is called the Artistry. And it's an artist lounge in West Hollywood. Many of you may have been there. As you can see, it's really got a light, airy vibe to it. It's a two-story lounge. So on the first floor, they actually have their dispensary. And then if you go upstairs, the second floor is the first floor of the lounge, which is the smoking area. And that picture that I just showed you here is of the second floor. And so smoking is allowed here. And then on the third floor, they actually have an event space for yoga classes and movie nights, and there's no smoking up on that area. So in terms of their revenue streams, again, a purchase at the Artistry is required. So that's a dispensary on the first floor. So you purchase product at the dispensary. They also have smoking equipment available for rent, and they've got VIP lounges and an event space for rent. They also have artwork for sale. Obviously, the main theme here is art and cannabis. So they have rotating art for sale each month, just like you would at some cafes locally too. So in terms of food and beverage, they do serve non-cannabis food and beverage. It's delivered through a couple of local restaurants nearby. They do have also what's different about this one. They do have a menu that you can purchase from at the lounge. And so on that menu is where they offer the non-cannabis food and beverage, but they also have some cannabis edibles and drinks that you can purchase from that menu. So you're not required to make a dispensary purchase. You can also just make one at the lounge. But if you're not making one off of that menu, then you need to have gone to the artistry dispensary to get something. Here's a couple of photos. Again, this is the second floor. They've got some nice outdoor seating areas. This is the dab bar that they have on the second floor, which is pretty cool. And then this is the third floor event space and yoga studio. And then outside, they've got some more outside seating there as well. The third one that we're going to take a look at is the Woods. This is also in West Hollywood. This is like a high-end resort vibe for the Woods, and it's a very like luxurious nature-themed lounge. It's co-founded by Woody Harrelson. It's like I said, it's a resort style lounge. Has a very natural aesthetic. Their revenue streams, they're a little bit different than the other two that we went over. They've got a Ganja Garden. And so the Ganja Garden is an outdoor smoking area. This lounge is attached to a dispensary. So if you buy a product from the dispensary next door, you have access to the Ganja Garden. They also have private cabanas, and those are a secluded space for groups. They've got TVs, sound systems. They have access to the garden, and those you have to rent ahead of time. The other component that they have is a lounge membership. So this would be a monthly membership. It includes a locker to store your cannabis in, and it gives you free access to the lounge. They do offer some food and beverage. They have tea and coffee available from a local cafe. Here we've got a picture of one of the cabanas, really cool looking. Here is the garden that, again, if you make a purchase from the dispensary, you have access to. And then another photo I just wanted to show of the garden, or from the garden. It shows you the cabanas that are available for rent. So very private. Okay, so we talked to a couple of operators in other cities and other local jurisdictions, and some components came up that they thought were helpful to share with those who may be looking to open up a cannabis lounge in the city of LA. And so one of the things that folks talked about a lot is key differentiators. So in the examples that we talked about, you saw that ambiance was really different in all of the lounges. So really deciding from the beginning, what is your ambiance going to be? What's your product mix and your service style? Opportunities. Clearly, there's an opportunity for cafes and restaurants right now where you're preparing the food on site. So getting a head start on real estate, whether it's for a cafe or restaurant style lounge or any lounge, that was another opportunity that folks brought up that really helped them to get their business operating sooner than others, was to just try to get a start on real estate, looking around, finding a compliant facility so that once the ordinance is passed, you're not stuck looking for real estate when everybody else is, right? You've already locked your spot in. Community engagement was key. I know for folks that were able to get started quickly with their cannabis lounge, working closely with the city and the neighbors the whole time really helps the process go more smoothly. Having a good rapport with the city and your neighbors, it'll just help in terms of easing any kind of concerns people might have, to try to be proactive about that rather than reactive is definitely helpful. Diversifying revenue streams. As you saw, a lot of these spaces have the opportunity for events to be hosted, memberships, and non-cannabis sales were really key to diversifying the revenue and making sure that the business is successful. Staff training is really key. So prioritizing hospitality and compliance knowledge when you're hiring staff for your lounge. Another component that was brought up is the back of house space. So if you are preparing food on your site, back of house areas typically require, 30% or 50% of the total space. So just making sure that you've got enough prep space, food storage area, dishwashing and cleaning stations, staff lockers, break areas, delivery and staging zones. Those are really important. Also, if you're preparing food, making sure that you're working with a local health department. We're not really talking about the local health department requirements at this point in time, but it will trigger some other permits that are going to be required. And last, just mentioning this one again, but getting an early start on finding a location is really helpful in terms of shortening the on-ramp to operations. So looking for properly zoned areas, as soon as possible is great. So that concludes this part of the presentation. We're going to jump over to the Q&A section where Jason Killeen is going to join us. But before we dive in, I just wanted to remind you guys again that the City of Los Angeles does not currently have event or consumption lounge licenses. Those activities may not be conducted locally at this time. The purpose of this webinar is to solicit public input and discuss policy proposals that are not yet law. DCR cannot guarantee that any comments or suggestions that you hear today will be included in the final form of these laws. All right, over to you, Frank.
Great. Thank you, Courtney. A lot of great information. Thank you very much. Now let's move to the Q&A portion of the webinar. As part of the Q&A portion, we are being joined by LADCR's Assistant Executive Director, Jason Killeen. Jason oversees the department's licensing and compliance activities, manages the department's licensing and case management information technology programs, and works with stakeholders to simplify complex procedures and automate activities, making it easy for city personnel and citizens to search, communicate, and share information. He's also responsible for managing revenue collections, enhancing enforcement activities, and improving customer service. So welcome, Jason. So we have quite a few questions that have been trickling in and have been that we've been compiling over this topic for several days and weeks. And Jason, I'm going to start with you, a series of questions here to kind of give some additional depth. So Jason, can you go over the potential criteria for lounges in Los Angeles, and will there be social equity exclusivity?
Good afternoon. And as soon as my permissions are updated, I'll go ahead and turn my camera on, but I can tackle this question for now.
Okay.
So we DCR are waiting for a council motion, which is actually listed under council file number 241584 to be adopted. If that motion is adopted, it requests two things from DCR. The first is to report on best practices surrounding the temporary cannabis event licenses and consumption lounge. Working with Dr. Brown, the social equity team, our attorneys and licensing experts in other jurisdictions, we've already collected much of that information and we're prepared to present those reports. Secondarily, it requests a report on a potential regulatory framework for the local level. And we've kind of kicked around a few of those ideas at recent budget and finance committee meetings. We were asked during those deliberations what the department would recommend, and I publicly stated that, the city already has a process for temporary events and special events. Folks currently go to building and safety or one of our public works departments to pull event permits. Building and safety if it's at a specific location, public works if the event is going to occur in the public right of way. Each of those departments have clearances where the event organizer or the person seeking the permit will go to different city agencies depending on the size of the event, where it's located, to have them review the project. So the recommendation is just to use the city's existing process and DCR would just become a clearance within that process. So we would verify that folks that are going to engage in on-site retail sales hold both a local license and a state license, and verify that for the other agency. And that is our proposed minimal role. And of course, it would be a proposal. So, the mayor, the city council, stakeholders may want more involvement or less involvement, and that'll be up to those policymakers. A lot of what I cover today are the department's proposals. And, we're still waiting for our local officials to adopt a regulatory framework, request the city attorney to prepare and present an ordinance. So very little of those proposals will actually be, guaranteed to become law.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. And I think you made a great point of the process and kind of going through the evolution of those processes. So thank you. Another question, Jason, that came in: when it comes to retail licenses applying for consumption lounges, do you know if any additional licenses will need to be obtained, or are we confident that the current retail license will cover the application eligibility process for a lounge as well?
So two things there. I'm confident that a separate license will be required for consumption. It's been discussed that that license would be a bolt-on to an existing Type 10 licensee, similar to other jurisdictions. And then the city would also be pursuing a standalone consumption lounge. There are going to be different challenges for businesses as it relates to zoning and permitting. Separately, we recently transmitted a report for city council consideration to amend our land use regulations. And if that is adopted, then zoning that's used for bars, hookah lounges, cigar lounges, building and safety would have the ability to permit a cannabis related activity in those same zones, which would expand where people could potentially pursue not only existing license opportunities, but also prospective future license opportunities.
Great. Yeah, and then a follow-on question that came in from maybe a retail operator: we have space in our retail for a lounge. Will the DCR change the sensitive use location requirements for lounges?
So, again, we've already made recommendations, and I think those recommendations are under Council File 201125 S1. And what those recommendations would do would be would defer to the Department of Building and Safety and their expertise on the zoning code. And if Building and Safety would issue a certificate of occupancy for a similar use to a different business, to allow for them to issue that same certificate of occupancy to our applicant or licensee, which would then enable them to pursue their final inspection, get their health permits and everything else. Really, DCR has to work hand in hand with these other city agencies to make sure that our licensees have a path forward to pursue all of the necessary permits for them to operate lawfully. But just like we have bars that have are in commercial zones, hopefully this is treated similarly, where if you have a Type 10 license in a commercial zone, you would be able to expand. We also have breweries that are in the restricted manufacturing zones that have tap rooms. And to the extent that somebody is engaged in those non-retail activities, they have a retail license, ideally they would also be able to expand their footprint in that MR zone to allow for on-site consumption, similar to a brewery. So we'll have to wait to see if the land use ordinance is adopted, and then also see what they do with the special event and on-site consumption permitting processes.
Thank you. And I don't know if you answered this inside of that response, but what should LA operators do to prepare for AB 1775 compliance locally?
So that's going to be hard to answer until we have an adopted framework. The existing law allows for the jurisdiction to expand for smoking, vaping, ingesting edibles. And we have not adopted that local ordinance to allow for that at a permitted location. Currently, when there's special events and other things happening, folks will either purchase cannabis at a licensed retail or have cannabis delivered. And then if there's an event going on, it's really up to the event organizer to determine whether or not cannabis can be consumed at the event, but there are no on-site sales. Separately, DCR did update its rules and regulations in April of this year, after AB 1775 was adopted, to remove some of the restrictions for like on-site entertainment, for folks to sell non-cannabis infused goods and food at their business premises location. Previously, having a food truck come in was prohibited, and it could be viewed as having a party at the location. We remove that language. Folks still have to pull the necessary permits, not create a nuisance within their geography. But if a food truck was in the parking lot selling tacos, that's not going to be a prohibited activity anymore.
Okay, thank you. Another clarifying question here, Courtney, I'll ask you this one. Will AB 1775 change how cannabis businesses advertise in the city of Los Angeles?
Yeah, so that bill does not have any modifications to the advertising requirements, so simply stated no.
Yeah, so I know advertising's pretty restrictive, so just business as usual, right?
Yeah,
As far as
yeah,
compliance, yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
Just making sure nothing can be advertised to children, things like that. So
Yep, great. Okay, Jason, another question. Once AB 1775 is rolled out in the city of LA, will there be any way for us to give feedback on said rollout?
I would say yes. Since the city hasn't even adopted a framework,
Yeah.
as reports start the public hearing process, there's definitely going to be opportunities for stakeholders, existing licensees and prospective licensees, to weigh in on the proposed policies. I wouldn't be surprised if the mayor and council members wanted community feedback on proposed regulations before they're adopted. So I could see them requesting DCR to do stakeholder meetings to gather input from the community before either of those policies move forward. And then, of course, as reports are transmitted, the council committees that hear those reports have the opportunity to make amendments to them. And then once it gets to full city council, they can introduce additional motions to modify whatever came out of the committee process. So because we're so early in the process, I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunity for the community to get involved before proposed regulations come out. And then as proposals come out, weigh in on those proposals and have conversations with, our local policymakers about the feasibility of some of these proposed regulations.
Yeah, so it's kind of stay tuned for some of those future engagements. And I don't know this question, if you answered it in that response, but what outreach or education is DCR planning to help cannabis businesses understand AB 1775 requirements?
So, we've had a couple of webinars recently and Q&A sessions where we've talked about revisions we've made to the rules and regulations, where a food truck being on site would not be seen as a violation, allowing folks to have speakers, a DJ, some type of entertainment, provided they get their necessary permits for whether it's going to be in a parking lot or actually in their business premises. And then as additional policies get adopted, there's going to be the ability to provide additional guidance, technical assistance, webinars on how people can lawfully engage in some of the activities that would be allowed under AB 1775.
Great. And Jason, there's lots of questions in here for you, so I appreciate your rapid responses here. Will the city of LA allow for non-cannabis infused food and beverage to be prepared and sold at a cannabis consumption lounge?
I mean, in line with some of the amendments to the regulation, I would assume yes. So as the consumption lounge proposal and framework goes forward, it would take a policymaker to make that a prohibited activity. If, of course, they make it a prohibited activity, then, it would be either in law or an update to the rules and regulations. But as the rules and regulations stand now, a licensee would be able to sell a Pepsi or a hot dog at the location, provided it's not cannabis infused.
Mhm. Yeah, and a lot coming with the process, and for most of us, understanding the process and the complexities of that. Can you what is the process for drafting consumption lounge ordinances, and how long will it take to pass? Just going through that as everyone's anxious to learn more and enter into this opportunity.
That it's a for timeline, that's a
Yeah.
really hard question to answer.
Hmm.
A motion was introduced in December of 2024. The Government Operations Committee heard that motion in January of this year. That motion is still pending consideration of the full city council. So when it gets to the full city council, other council members will have an opportunity to weigh in on the moving language, which asks for DCR to report back on, best practices in a proposed framework. And then, of course, once it gets adopted, now it's part of DCR's legislative requirement for the upcoming legislative cycle. So we would prepare the reports as directed, we would transmit them. They would go to the city clerk, get scheduled in Government Operations Committee. They could get scheduled in our Budget and Finance Committee if there's revenue implications. Until it gets to the city clerk, we don't know what legislative route it's going to take.
Mm.
There will be public hearings, there'll be public input. What comes out of those hearings may or may not actually request the office of the city attorney to prepare and present an ordinance to amend the municipal code to make that framework law. And, it's actually going to take some kind of request to the office of the city attorney to draft an ordinance to effectuate whatever policy the mayor and council want to see, not only on the temporary special event side, but also on the on-site consumption side. They could move in parallel, they could move together as one item, they could move separately. I think the motion landing first and getting adopted by council, us transmitting the reports that we've already started to work on, will kind of help guide at least my anticipation of what that legislative route is going to take and what timing could look like. But it could be 2025, it could be 2026. I don't know. I do know that there are the World Cup coming up, the Olympics coming up, of course. So the sooner the city can at least adopt a framework, the more opportunity there is going to be for existing licensees to tap into new revenue streams and for the city to benefit from the taxation on those new revenue streams.
Yeah, and I think we all realize that it's a complex and formal process that could take some time, but I know how anxious people are to enter into business opportunities. So appreciate that clarification to follow the process. Courtney, I'm going to ask this question of you. Is there a resource that I can find a list of all jurisdictions that allow cannabis consumption lounges, just so I can learn a little bit more about the opportunities and what other jurisdictions might be doing?
Sure. The Department of Cannabis Control has a resource on their website where you can go county by county and city by city and see what they allow. It's a little bit clunky to work through, but it definitely is the most up-to-date way to find out which jurisdictions allow for cannabis consumption lounges. The other one I mentioned earlier is CalNormal. If you just Google search CalNormal cannabis consumption lounges, a link will pop up to a blog post they did recently where it lists out every jurisdiction that has a cannabis consumption lounge ordinance. And then within each of the jurisdictions, it has the name and link and some information on the actual cannabis lounges in their city or county. So that's a great resource. I've obviously plugged into that quite a bit. It's not current though. As we know, there are jurisdictions that have recently passed cannabis consumption lounge policies, like the city of Sacramento, that aren't included, just so it's a little bit outdated, not too outdated, but a little bit. But that was really helpful to look at. So Cal Normal's a good spot to look.
Okay, great. I know a lot of people are curious about what others have done in the
Yes.
kind of like in your slides, like around the business models and
Yeah, there's
ideas.
definitely a wide array of models. We just
Mhm.
took a glance at a few different, but there's some interesting business models out there. So I would encourage everybody to take a look and see what folks are offering.
Yeah, great, thank you. And Jason, another question. Does the consumption lounge need to be in the same building as my dispensary, or can it be in a separate location?
So our proposal would be for the first wave to focus on our existing type 10 retailers. That could expand their footprint or add a consumption lounge at their location, but then also have future waves where on-site consumption would be a standalone license at a standalone business premise, like it is for other jurisdictions. But again, just want to reiterate that, you know, what DCR proposes doesn't actually mean it's going to make the final law. And we're still a long ways away from getting community input, stakeholder feedback, and most importantly, the feedback from our policymakers on what these proposals and final framework would look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And maybe similar to the question I had asked Courtney about entrepreneurs looking at different models around the state, or for that matter around the country. Is the city of LA also looking at other cities and counties to model its ordinance off of?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We've been engaged in extensive stakeholder outreach and meetings with other jurisdictions
Mm-hmm.
that have consumption lounges. They do special events. We're trying to determine what the most sound policy proposals for a city like LA would be, understanding that really there is no other city that allows it that is comparable in geography and population, as
Mm-hmm.
well as potential tourism like LA. I know, we've got West Hollywood, which is our neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
Port Hueneme allows for it. Denver was one of the earliest adopters. So we've
Yeah.
definitely looked at them. San Francisco, which is another large California city, Sacramento. We're looking at Nevada, the state of Massachusetts. So we're looking at a ton of different options. And we're also looking at states that actually may have volume that would be similar to LA.
Yeah, there's a lot of different models, and I think as people learn, they also have to realize that what those jurisdictions have decided in their ordinance, may or may not be allowed in LA. So you got to be really careful on, your research is good to learn and get experience, but not necessarily can you do all that in your respective cities. And then Courtney, another question. Can a delivery license obtain a cannabis lounge license, or is it only storefront dispensaries?
I think Jason pretty much answered this in
Okay.
his previous questions, which is it's hard to know exactly what the city of LA is going to roll out at this point. But what we've seen is that you have to have a retail storefront and an adjacent location, or a standalone would be your best bet in terms of if you're looking for real estate to open a lounge. Try to model it off of those two examples.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I don't know if this is a Courtney and Jason or both, but um, how do I go about getting an event license with the DCC?
Well, to start with the DCC requirements, in order to host an event, you have to have 2 state licenses. So there's a cannabis event organizer license, which you would apply for and is good for a year. And then you've got your temporary cannabis event license, and that would be what you would submit for your specific event, which is, a 1 to 4 day event. You've got to submit the application for the temporary event 60 calendar days before your event. So yeah, so it's a 2 license process with the state. And then Jason could probably explain what the city of LA requires.
Mhm.
Thank you. Yeah, for LA currently, we do have special events, of course, that happen within the city. Other city agencies handle permitting those events. At none of the events are on-site sales allowed. So what we've seen is, if there's an event in a hotel and the hotel's going to allow consumption, maybe deliveries are made to the location or a location adjacent to it. The transaction is completed, and then people go into the event to consume. From a regulatory standpoint, we know that the transaction is being completed by a licensee, the tax revenue for that sale is being completed, and that the property owner for that private parcel is allowing for consumption to happen. Once we kind of move into a separate model where if special events that allow for on-site sales to happen, again, the framework is kind of making the recommendation to use the city's current infrastructure, and then for DCR just to be a clearance within that process so we can vet the folks that are going to participate in the event to make sure that they possess the necessary licenses for lawful transactions to occur at the location.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Jason. And Jason, you may have, I know you touched on this, but just maybe a clarifying question that had come in. Can cannabis lounges prepare cannabis-infused food and beverages on site? Or maybe does the ordinance, proposed ordinance, recommend that or suggest that or allow that?
Yeah, currently, there can't be any infusion of cannabis products for a specific consumption lounge. We've kind of looked at it 3 ways. Having a one license type proposed, and then having regulations that determine what types of activities you can engage in using the license. So you can think of a business where all they're doing is selling prepackaged goods that have already been tested. The amount of cannabis and each serving size has already been measured, and they're selling those prepackaged edibles to then be consumed on site. That would require one type of building permit. It would require one type of health permit, fire permits, etc. And then you can take a step up, which would be folks that are smoking or vaping. You think about a cannabis lounge, a hookah lounge, those folks are going to have different health permits and certificates of occupancy and fire requirements than a business where they're just consuming prepackaged edibles. There's going to be ventilation, et cetera. And then that third flavor is, of course, when people are going to infuse things that are being made on site with cannabis, then it's harder to, guarantee that when somebody takes a bite of the meal or something that's prepared, they're not going to get all of the THC from the product in that bite or first few bites. And if people are doing it family style, et cetera, how do you make sure that the health of the consumers is protected? And because you're doing on-site food preparation, that's a different type of health permit, of course, building permits, fire permits, et cetera. So the proposal is to look at it from as a multi-layered approach where the things that are easiest to regulate be allowed to move first while the city comes to an agreement on what the different permitting and requirements are going to be for the other types of consumption activities, but still only have like one license types that DCR has to manage. So it's not like a consumption lounge A license, B license, C license, D license, and you have to maybe get 4 licenses if you're going to pursue it, because then it becomes cost prohibitive.
Yeah, no, yep, it can get a little complex with all the nuances and variables. And Kathleen had asked a question earlier about, is coffee and cannabis allowed? Just coffee. I mean, I guess, coffee is like a coffee shop kind of thing. Not quite sure how if that is unique or, regulated, or just simply, an alternative, an option for an entrepreneur?
Right. Right now it's not allowed, but
Yeah.
you can think of a state where if a coffee shop could get the consumption license and they have a way to infuse the coffee either on site or they have some kind of pre-packaged coffee blend that they're just brewing, that there could be a path forward for that. But there's definitely going to be a lot of entrepreneurs in this state. There's going to be a lot of folks that come up with very creative activities, and the
Mhm.
city's approach to date has been, let's be as prohibitive as possible. And then as public safety and public health outcomes are found to not exceed whatever we've allowed to date, we'll peel back the onion and be more permissive. I've heard from some of our council members, especially during this budget and finance hearing process, that maybe it's time to look at cannabis businesses more like other businesses and be more permissive on the front end and then become prohibitive once we know that people have not, you know, taken the consumer's public health and public safety into account and then add additional requirements for people to comply. So it'll be very interesting to see with this new group of council members and our new mayor, whether
Yeah.
they're going to be more permissive than the last administrations or as equally prohibitive. So
Yeah.
again, it's very hard to tell right now. There's going to be a lot
Yeah.
of input and a lot of community engagement that happens before we issue that first license.
Yeah. No, no, absolutely. And if you're an interested participant or entrepreneur, it just emphasizes getting involved, having some input, getting clarification, and asking good questions of your local leaders is critical, right? Um, and Courtney, as we kind of start wrapping up here, here's a good question that came in. What are some additional requirements consumption lounge license holders will need to submit as part of their annual license application or operating permit application?
Great. Yeah. Well, at this point, we don't know exactly what the city of Los Angeles is going to require, in
Mhm.
addition to what is required for all other license types. But what I can tell you is what I've seen in other jurisdictions. So I'd say public safety seems to be paramount. So putting together a impaired driving prevention plan, I've seen in a couple different cities, and what that includes is, okay, you have to have a closing announcement an hour before the lounge closes, so everybody knows it's last call, and to make sure that you're ready for that, right? The other component is retail limits. So what's the limit on selling somebody cannabis or cannabis products, so that they don't overconsume. Also having car services available, and then also monitoring exits and entries. So when people are entering, obviously you're making sure that they're 21, but when they're exiting, also just making sure that people don't seem inebriated or anything. And if they are, you handle it appropriately. So again, impaired driving prevention plans you can expect to maybe have to put together and submit. Also, education and training programs are paramount. Making sure that obviously your team is really up to date on compliance as it relates to consumption lounges, and also just making sure that they know how to talk about products to the consumers. So potency, absorption times, effects, things like that. You want to make sure your managers and employees really are able to educate the customers. Also, odor control plans. We've talked about that with air filtration systems, negative pressure upon entry, things like that, to make sure that the neighborhood isn't being affected by the odors of the consumption lounge. So those are a couple of things I thought worth mentioning that I've seen in other jurisdictions.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, thank you. And we're right at the top of the hour. I'm going to ask one last maybe question that Jason, you've touched on a little bit, but and it's really just maybe kind of more wrap up. But a lot of the entrepreneurs, and we had someone submit a question about there's some major events, world events coming to LA. The 2026 World Cup, you get the Olympics coming in 2028. And I don't know if, what would the city need to do to pass legislation to finalize the process in order for an applicant to actually have realistic time to open up by then? I mean, those processes on both sides could take a long time. I just didn't know if there was some kind of guidance or idea of what that might look like, but
The sooner the better
yeah,
is really the approach. During those budget and finance hearings, we did get council members saying, hey, we can't miss this opportunity as a city
yeah.
for being on the world stage. And there would be a strategy that if there are opportunities to bifurcate the different license types or kind of move
Mm,
things where there's a political consensus forward, address those things early so that, things for like infusing foods or doing, a major event at Dodger Stadium,
mm,
those are kind of tabled and handled differently. So our approach is going to be move the lowest hanging fruit quickly. And if there's something that's bogging down the entire process, it may be good for the policymakers to peel that off and have
mm,
it handled on a separate track. So at least the things where there is consensus can move forward more quickly. But realistically, if we can get something done 6 months before the World Cup, we
mhm.
would be in a good position to make sure that folks have what they need locally to be able to capture that revenue.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Jason. I think that's the perfect answer. And everyone's excited. So, this is a big, LA is always, going to be in the spotlight with these world events. And I think, entrepreneurs and consumers and tourists are excited about the evolution of what could come for the consumption lounges. So I want to close here now at the top of the hour. I want to thank you again to our presenter, Courtney Lang, and obviously participation from Jason Killeen. And thank you all for attending this informative webinar offered by the City of Los Angeles Department of Cannabis Regulation. This webinar recording will be found on DCR's Learning Management System once the video is edited and ready for publishing. If you have any questions on accessing your account, please email dcr.sep@lacity.org. Thank you again for joining us and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you, everyone.